May the words of my mouth, the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, who brings light into the darkness. Amen. Please be seated. So imagine that scene. Put yourself there. You're fishing with your brother, or perhaps with your Woodberry roommate, someone who, for some of you older students, is like a brother. When a guy you don't know walks up and says, "Follow me." And not only that, but he says, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men." Imagine that. A complete stranger walks up to you, does not introduce himself, does not say hello, and just says, "Follow me." And then there's that mysterious second half of the sentence, "I will make you fishers of men." What would you do if that happened to you? How would you react? Most of us, and I probably include myself in that, would think a crazy person had walked up, and we would walk away about as fast as we could. The gospel lesson tonight is at a strange spot in Matthew. In the reading that comes right before this, we hear the devil's efforts to tempt Jesus during a 40-day spell in the wilderness. The chapter before that has the readings from Advent, the ones about John the Baptist that Mr. Amos preached on, and when he reminded us of what an unusual person John was. And in the verses before that, we hear how Joseph, Mary, and Jesus had to flee Israel for Egypt so they were not killed by King Herod. So yeah, the guy standing there on the side of the Sea of Galilee saying, "Follow me." If Simon and Andrew had been keeping up with the local news, they would have known that the newcomer in town was not issuing a call to a quiet and boring life. And yet we hear that they put down their nets and followed Jesus, and that James and John did the same, and not only that, they left their father sitting in his boat. They heard the call and they followed. It's a perplexing thing. Those of us on the faculty spend most of our time urging you to listen to us, to take our advice, all those things like buy into Woodberry, study hard, listen to your parents. But here we are in chapel, another place where we're always asking you to listen to our advice. And we have a gospel reading tonight that is far from the advice we would normally give you. It's like my advisee is going into town with me, getting out of the school minivan at Sheetz, and walking away with a stranger while I sit there in the minivan. And as odd as this story seems, it's always been one of my favorites in the entire Bible, ever since I first remember hearing it back in elementary school. Part of it's the simplicity of the call. Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. It's a call to a new life. It's a call to action. It's both simple, follow me, and very profound. Part of the reason I also love the passage is the quotation of Isaiah, which we heard in the first reading, and then we heard the paraphrase in the gospel reading. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those that lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. I love the idea of a great light coming to people who are walking in darkness. And I love that it comes from somewhere unexpected, just like Jesus came from an unexpected place, a stable in a little village called Bethlehem. So I imagine that most of you, like me, are not experts on geography of Palestine. So if you're curious, go home to your dorm tonight and look up Capernaum on Google Maps. You'll see it's in the middle of nowhere. 2,000 years ago, it was a little village, probably just a collection of huts, on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. Today, it's even less than that, a collection of orchards and a few monasteries. It's a long, hot 100-mile walk from Capernaum down to Jerusalem. That was the center of life then and now in that area. So here we are tonight in this chapel, a long, cold 100-mile walk from Washington, D.C., the center of power in this part of the world. And what are we to make of the story from 2,000 years ago? Why is it that Andrew, the man our chapel is named for here at Woodberry, and Simon, who is called Peter, the man who becomes the first pope and plays such a crucial role in establishing a Christian church, why were they, the fishermen, the first people Jesus approached and asked to follow him? They weren't famous, they weren't wealthy, they weren't powerful. And why did this all happen in the middle of nowhere, in a quiet little fishing village, rather than in Jerusalem? Here's my answer to that question. I think it happened there, out of the spotlight, because it's important that we all know that all of us in the chapel, and indeed all of us in the world, are called to be fishers of men, not just the important people, quote unquote. I don't mean becoming a fisher of men just in the strict, narrow sense of being a disciple and devoting your life to preaching and traveling around, though maybe some of us are called to do that. I think the idea of being a fisher of men means that we are all called to bring light into the world, and specifically light into the darkness. It means we're called to a life of service to others, a life when we spend more time thinking about how we can love one another rather than take care of ourselves. Because basically everyone in this chapel is a Woodberry student or faculty member, I hope you've already heard some sort of call like that, to be a fisher of men. After all, it's really hard to be a happy member of this community if you spend all of your time looking out for yourself. It's not an attitude I actually see here very often. Instead, what I see is a culture that's built on the students' belief in brotherhood and the faculty's belief that we should know, challenge, and love the students, and, if we're honest, the harder part probably, love each other. When we live up to the best version of those goals, we are being fishers of men. I also hope you've heard that call because I want each and every one of you to be part of something bigger than yourself. We are all wired mentally and biologically to be in communities. We are wired to help others, to work for the good of a group. We're wired to love one another. There are people in this chapel and people all over the world who are feeling a little bit of darkness, feeling like those tribes from Isaiah, people who sit in great darkness. And so they need you to go out and bring them some light. They need that whether you're from Charlotte or California or China or anywhere else. They need the love, compassion, courage that you all can show on your best days on this campus to go out into the world. I spend a lot of time thinking about stories like this from the Bible, about stories I told as a journalist, about the stories my journalism students tell now. I've always loved stories. And I think stories help us understand why the fishermen put down their nets and followed a stranger named Jesus 2,000 years ago. And I think it's an important thing to wonder about. This verse is important enough that when we put an icon in the chapel of St. Andrew, it's the one out of all the verses in the Bible we chose to have inscribed on it. It's a verse that can change lives. It's a verse that asks you to answer a call. And I want you to go out and accept calls, even ones that are strange and unusual and maybe even a little weird, because all of us are primed for that idea of being something bigger than ourselves, and we're primed to go on an adventure. All the great stories, whether they're religious ones or secular ones, are full of this sort of call. You hear it in the gospel tonight, but you'll find good examples in Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, pretty much every other major world religion. You'll find the same sort of call in Star Wars, or Harry Potter, or the Marvel Universe, and plenty of other examples. And if you stop to think about this type of story, this type of call, you'll notice it comes to ordinary people, like fishermen in Galilee, or Peter Parker, or an 11-year-old living in a closet under the stairs. The hero in the story comes from an unlikely place. The great light emerged 2,000 years ago from the Gentile lands beyond the Jordan, not from Jerusalem. This whole idea is wrapped up in a book that Joseph Campbell wrote called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And we don't have time tonight to go through it all, but if you're interested, you can get it from the library or talk to me about it later. But Campbell's idea is that all the great stories, in fact, come out of a common theme. He summarized it like this. A hero goes forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. The heroes in the great stories find themselves working to protect and care for their friends and their family. And in so many of the stories, we find that the families we choose, the communities we build our lives in, and that accept us as a part of them, are as important or even more important than the families we're born into. James and John left their father in the boat and went to join a new family, the disciples. They did this not because they didn't love their father, but because they recognized and saw a call to service and to join another community. You've chosen to come here to Woodberry. You've chosen the students and the faculty in this chapel as your family. And everyone else, in turn, has chosen and accepted you as family, which makes us part of this group of students, teachers, staff, alumni that goes back 130 years. We have all chosen this family together. When Jesus called, the fishermen followed. They formed these new bonds of love and family, just like you're doing here. They journeyed with Jesus. They saw miracles performed. They witnessed what looked like a total defeat in Jerusalem, and then saw it become the ultimate victory on Easter, when Jesus rose from the dead and broke the power of sin and death over our lives. And then the disciples came back from their adventure, or went out on new adventures, with that power to share the story of what they had seen, the power to build the church into a worldwide community. We got an unhappy reminder yesterday, if you're a basketball fan or just follow the news, that we don't know how long we've got. And we don't know when our time is up. So I will just say tonight to end that I don't know if you'll ever have a moment like the one described in Galilee. I don't know if you'll ever see a burning bush in the wilderness like Moses did, or if you'll hear God calling in the middle of the night like Samuel. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But even if a call is less dramatic, even if it's really quiet, I know you're going to hear one. So imagine the scene. A stranger walks up to you, doesn't say hello or even introduce himself, and says, "Follow me." What will happen next is up to you. Amen.